You're listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
Rootbound is sponsored by water. What's got 2 H's and 1 O? Oh, it's water!
Thanks again for listening to another episode of Rootbound. I'm your host, Steve. So I was thinking that it's been a little while since we've done any botanical vocabulary at the top of the show here, so today I want to talk about 2 words that are related to each other. That is monocot and dicot. So let's talk about what these words mean. They're both actually abbreviations, because that ending word cot is an abbreviation of a word called cotyledon. So they're actually monocotyledon or dicotyledon. And so let's talk about what a cotyledon is first before we define monocotyledon and dicotyledon, because obviously one is the one cotyledon and one is 2 cotyledon. So a cotyledon is an embryonic leaf. So that is a leaf that is within the seed of a plant. And if you have a monocotyledon, that means there's only one embryonic leaf in the seed, and if you have a dicotyledon, there's 2 embryonic leaves in the seed. And monocotyledon and dicotyledon get shortened to monocot and dicot. So let's think about what that means. If you ever think about a bean sprout, for example, when the seed first sprouts, there's always 2 little leaves that come up with it. That makes it a dicot. But if you think of something like grass or corn, when those come up from the seed, there's only 1 little straight leaf, and that makes them monocots. There's a bunch of other ways to tell the difference between these 2 classifications of flowering plants, but the one I found most interesting that I just learned recently has to do with the flowers of each plant. A monocot will have flowers whose petals are in multiples of 3, whereas a dicot's petals will be in multiples of 4 or 5. So I thought that was pretty interesting. One more little tidbit is that most trees are dicots, except for palm trees, which are monocots. So that's dicots versus monocots, and now it's time to meet our guest.
With the advent of the spring rains, the root system, fine and well-branched, quickly absorbs the water, and the grass grows rapidly.
Hi, Wing-Ting.
Hi, Steve.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Do you have a plant to share with us?
I sure do.
Great.
Today, the plant I'm going to share is actually called Setaria.
Setaria?
Yes.
I've never heard of this plant.
It's actually a species of many plants, and this is just a general name, I reckon. And usually the much more well-known name for this is foxtail.
Foxtail.
In the English-speaking world, and in China we call it dogtail. So it's kind of had similarity. So you kind of get an idea of how it actually looks. It's just a tail-like furry kind of little plant.
Interesting. Okay, so see, this is where I'm going to interrupt you a few times if that's okay. So foxtail, I think I've heard of that, but I can't picture what the plant looks like in my mind. And I think it's a plant that I should know, but I guess I don't. Could you describe it a bit more?
You've probably seen it somewhere, but this is like a type of grass or weed, you call it, and it usually grows on some deserted parking lot or abandoned tree track. It's not something you would see on a garden or anything, because usually there's some grass you want to eliminate, and usually and it shows up on vacant lots, sidewalks, and railroads and lawns. And it's very common. If you like to go to these kind of places, you will see them. Usually you probably see them on the sidewalks.
Okay, cool. I'm actually going to be live Googling it now so I can get the image in my brain here. But yeah, please carry on. Tell me some fun facts and stuff about foxtail.
Yeah, so foxtail is I'm gonna start with a little bit technical side, so I describe a little so people get it what it actually looks like. So this is an annual grass with and it can grow up to a meter long, and known to reach to 2 meters or more at times. The leaf blades are up to about 40 centimeters long and about 2.5 centimeters wide. And it's a dense, compact, spike-like panicle up to 20 meters long and growing erect or sometimes nodding at the tip only. So it's
Okay.
yeah.
I'm looking at it now, and your description. I've totally seen plants like this. Um, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not much to it on the technical side, because I think that's also part of the reason why I love it. It's such a strong plant, and it doesn't require too much from the environment. It grows almost like whenever it grows. It favors a warm or moist environment to grow, and it's a really fun. It's actually a really fun plant for me when I was growing up as a kid. So when we were a kid, we would usually go seek them and you collect them as a bunch. It becomes a really nice little bouquet of grass, and it's furry. You use it like rub on your face. It's really soft, like a kitty's tail almost. It's really fun, and it also has a really interesting story. Like I don't know how do you say this in English if there's a better word, but each flower has a meaning. Like a rose represents love, and like
Hmm.
all those things. So this one represents like unrequited love, or
Oh, interesting.
and also like an uneasy pursuit of a love interest, and it also represents strength, and it represents like how much you're willing to commit to something. So to me, growing up, this is also like a huge representation of my own personality. I identify with this grass very much myself, because I don't consider myself as like, or like as this like really extrovert and like beautiful plant or such like rose or recognizable. I don't ever see myself that way, and like this grass really draws my attention is how easily it can be found and how tough it just grows everywhere, and yeah, and what it represents in my culture, which is like really interesting to me. And also it was documented in this like Chinese herbology book, the old one from like 1570, and Chinese, like written by Li Shizhen. Like it's the Chinese Ming dynasty is um bear with me, this is a complicated word for me to pronounce. It's called com Compendium of Materia Medica. This is like a book
Ah, uh-huh.
like 1,000 years ago, and
Compendium of Materia Medica.
yeah, that's the one.
I've heard of that before. Yes.
Yes, I always bite my tongue.
I don't know much about it though. Who wrote that?
It's this person called Li Shizhen. It's a very famous like people who have a tremendous amount of knowledge about herbs.
Uh-huh.
Lack of a
Cool.
better word.
Li Shijin. Did I
Yep,
pronounce it okay?
yep, that's you got it right.
Cool.
Yeah, and so it also has a herbal like function to it. Usually, people use it to treat with like inflammation or and use it have tinea on face or like your body, like a rash on your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it help with your eyesight problem. And so that's the kind of like a few known function that like the book was recorded to use this grass for. And
So I'm always interested in like herbal remedies, and is this there's a lot of herbal remedies you read about plants where it's like, well, it's for this and it's for this and it's for this, and then most people like at least in like everyday society have never like used it for that. Do you have any experience of this plant, like you like using it in any kind of way, or is it something it's more like reading about the history of it?
so like the most common use, like for us, if you have like a rash or like something on your face or your skin, you just use the plant, you rub it on your face, and it takes away the rash and helps with
Oh wow.
Yeah, and you can also like use the whole plant, including the tail, the top part, and also the stem and leaf. The whole plant can be used as a herbal medicine, like use it as tea, and then you can drink it to help like with your inflammation, and also it helps with like your how do I like the urine system if you have some problem
Uh huh.
urinating, and that will help you to have a smoother urine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Good. Yeah,
yeah,
that's good to know.
few common use that I know about this plant. And I think the most thing I think the most fascinating about is like the way this plant represents a spirit of a human. Like, given a tough condition, you can still grow despite of whatever the condition is, and also the strengths what this plant brings. And it's also really beautiful. You can use it to like the stem is really long and thin. It can easily be woven into a crown or like as a decoration, and it's really fun. And usually, when I was younger, when you find a field of this foxtail grass, is indication where easily that would be a field you can catch a lot of dragonflies. So we look for
Oh.
them, and like if we can't find a big empty lot of this grass, that means we can have a very high chance of catch some dragonflies.
Cool. That's very cool. And then you said you can also see it, in the United States. Is it something that you have seen here? I mean, you live in New York City. Have you seen it like in the streets, or is it something that you've come across over here?
New York, I think, because I felt like here a lot of like the urban veg vegetation is like, usually like designed or like maintained in a certain way, and this foxtail grass usually I think is considered weed. People don't usually want them, but the fun thing is they're not invasive plant. They're actually being studied for their like genetic coding to demonstrate this thing I looked up is called a monocot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that's I'm saying it right.
Yeah, yeah, monocot. I think that's how you pronounce it. That's like the grass family is
Yeah,
or monocots. Yeah.
yeah. So its genus is being studied for this. It's actually used as this. It's like a. It's like a. It's a vegetable that can feed the environment rather than some
Mm.
invasive like species that destroys the ecosystem or like very invasive for the existing ecosystem. So it's actually not to me that's just like describes is like the plant's personality is very neutral, very strong, but useful if you're willing to like discover it. And but usually most commonly oversighted, like discarded, no one really cares about it.
That's really interesting. I mean, that's really kind of a theme on this show so far has been this idea of weeds. That the idea of a weed is really mostly just means a misunderstanding that we don't get the plant. And this is a weed that I've been actually really fascinated with all the weeds in my yard and around here. But this is one I didn't know about. So yeah, thank you for sharing about that. One question I have is you mentioned how like you identify your personality with this plant. When did you first have that feeling, and like when did you be like, I identify with that plant? When can you like take me back to that moment?
It was almost like immediately right after like I saw this plant almost like I were just so fascinated about how furry it is. It's so cute. I love furry things. And then when I learned about it a little bit, and it just to me that's how I see myself. I don't like to be noticeable. I don't really I mean, it's like I do like attention, but I'd rather to be the background person most of the time. And this plant is just not in your face. I mean, you can easily find it anywhere, and it can be useful. Like when we're a little kid, the stem you can use it as partially a toothpick if you want. If you spit it up, you can like make it like a dental floss from it. It's a lot of use to it, and you if you want to, you can also make it into something beautiful to wear. You can make a little bouquet put behind your ear, and you can make a little crown. And to me, that's just how I see myself. I want to be noticeable and noticeable, and useful and not invasive. And it's something you would only see if you want to look for it. Otherwise, you would just, overlook because there are so many other beautiful plants around. And yeah, that's how I identify myself, I guess. It makes me feel comfortable. It's not feeling that it's not coming from the angle I feel worthless. Not really. I felt like that's kind of like, why I'm into weeds as well, like all kinds of weeds. It's just, and they're there and they all have their own personality. They all have their own usefulness to the ecosystem. And yeah, that's what I like to be.
A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he.
Thanks, Wenting, for sharing about foxtail. That was very interesting. Do you mind if I share a plant with you?
Of course, I would love to hear it.
Oh, great. So, I've had a wide variety of plants so far, and I think one theme of the show is they're all, well, some of them have been pretty common. What I'm trying to say is that this is a really common plant I chose this time, but I'm trying to pick a common plant and then see what other kind of interesting things I can find about it. And so this plant, why it's meaningful to me is because I'm growing it in my garden, and it's also probably one of my favorite herbs, and the plant is thyme, which is a great herb, and I really like it. One, I like the taste. Also, it's really easy to get the leaves off. Some herbs are not, but you can just pinch it and stroke all the little leaves off, and so that's why I like it. And I've been growing in my garden for a few years, and I've been using a lot. So it's a really nice plant, but I realized I don't really know anything about it at all. I just know that it's an herb. I know that there's it's like in that old folk song, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. It's always mixed with other herbs too. They always talk about it amongst those other ones. So anyway, I did a little bit of research and I found some super fascinating things. The first thing is I try not to just read straight from Wikipedia, and so I condense this down. But the first paragraph of Wikipedia on thyme talks about how it was used. So it's from the Mediterranean, and it talks about how it was used across a bunch of different Mediterranean cultures over time. And it's a wide variety. So it was used as incense. It was used to flavor cheese and liqueurs. It was thought to be a source of courage. It was used to purify rooms. It was used to aid sleep and ward off nightmares. And it was placed on coffins, and also apparently the ancient Egyptians used it during the embalming process. And I didn't know that thyme was that versatile. Have you cooked with thyme very much before?
You know what? I haven't. I grew up in China, and we don't use a lot of fresh herbs. So usually dried and grounded into powder form. I don't really recognize a lot of it. But I've seen a lot of it in American cooking, like baking, for stew, and with that famous bird American love so much, turkey. There's always a beautiful decoration of thyme around it.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because it is from the Mediterranean area, and it really became this herb well known in the Mediterranean area. It's really well known in French cuisine and also in Italian cuisine. But I didn't know it had so many different uses over time. So that was really interesting. Its Latin name is Thymus vulgaris, which sounds interesting, vulgar, but vulgar in Latin apparently just means common. So it just means common thyme. There are some other kinds of thyme. And then I tried to read about what that first part, thymus, means, because you have some plants with Latin names where they don't sound anything like the name that they're called. But this one, its Latin name is thymus. Thyme is thymus, and it's they just what do we call it? Oh, just put a US and make it sound Latin. But I was trying to figure out what's the etymology of thymus, where did it come from? And there was one reference that maybe there was a Greek word that sounded like that also meant to smoke or burn, and so maybe its use as incense is where they got the name thyme. But then there was one other author, which I don't have the name written down, an etymologist, who said that the name is very likely a pre-Greek name, the name comes from before the Greeks, and it's just the name of the plant. And we don't really maybe have any reason why it was called thyme, but that name has stuck around for a very long time. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is. No.
It's an evergreen plant, so I like that. It stays green all winter, and I still have some out in my yard. It's died back quite a bit, but I can still pick a few leaves if I need to. And also, I really like perennial plants. You know, when I'm gardening, I don't like have to plant seeds every year. So a plant that sticks around all the time is super cool to me, and it's also perennial. And then one of the most interesting things about thyme is it's been used for a lot of like antibacterial or disinfectant or other processes like that. And that's because one of the major components of the essential oil is something that they called thymol, which is a chemical. I'm going to try to pronounce the chemical name now, which is 2-isopropyl-5-methylphenol. And that is an element in thyme that has all these really great antiseptic, antibacterial, and disinfectant properties. And I read a list of all these different things it's actually used for industrial, for cleaning. I read that it was used as like a disinfectant inside anesthetic gas sometimes. And then I was like, oh, well, the Egyptians used it for embalming. So like they really knew what was going on, because if you want to make sure someone's embalmed, you got to make sure that there's no fungal growth or bacterial growth. And so that use is really like goes back to, it's like super original use, and now we're using it all the time in actual like cleaning products. And that brings me to probably maybe the main reason I chose it. Actually, I chose thyme, and then I remembered, oh yeah, there's this key thing about me that links to thyme, is that I'm a beekeeper. You might have known that. And one of the major threats to bees is a pest called the varroa mite. It's a little tiny bug, and the way that it affects bees is that when the larva is growing, it grows in there, and then when the larva hatches, the little mites come out, and then they attach themselves to bees, and they basically suck the bee's blood, which is like more like some other substance. And then in that process, they end up passing viruses and things to the bees, and it can really destroy a hive really easily. And there's all these different methods, and people are trying to figure out ways to get rid of infestations of this varroa mite, and it really is the bane of the beekeeper. And a lot of them can be really harsh to the bees, and some of them are like pharmaceuticals. So it's like, are you like gonna like, it's like that antibiotic effect. If you're treating it with this pharmaceutical now, you're just gonna like make stronger mites later that are more resistant. And so there's a lot of like, talk about what the best method is. But one of the newer methods and the least invasive method is these things called thyme. I think they're called thyme quick strips. I forget the name, but anyway, it's these little strips that are impregnated with this thyme oil that you slip in the hive, and then when the summer sun hits the hive, it evaporates the thyme oil, and the thyme oil is it is strong enough to kill the mites, but to not bother the bees. At least that's the theory. I haven't used it yet. I've been actually meaning to use this product for a while, but it's one that's been very interesting because it's not as like harsh as some of the other methods for controlling mites. And so, this plant thyme has all sorts of uses. And then maybe the final thing about thyme that I like is that it just is rife with puns. It sounds like the word time, like the clock. And so when I was Googling thyme, I was looking for the history in time, and there was so many people, like probably 10 different blog posts that were called A Brief History of Time, which is like a reference to the Stephen Hawking book, which was about time itself, but it was like the plant, or because thyme is used as a disinfectant, the phrase "time heals all wounds" is actually very, very, very relevant. And there's just lots of fun things about talking about thyme as a pun, and I like puns. So that's what I have to say about thyme.
That's awesome. I have a question actually. Would you burn thyme? Like, would that have the same disinfecting like function as like the vaporization of the oil?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I know people use thyme as an incense, and the Greeks and Romans used it as an incense, and so it might have some of those more like qualities just for like the way you breathe it in, the way it makes you feel, perhaps. Whether you would get any of the like, whether those like effects of burning the thyme would like help bees or anything like that, I'm not sure. That's a good question. Potentially that chemical might burn away as well instead of it like evaporating. But yeah, I should try it as an incense. I never actually thought about that till I read about the Greeks using it, and they believed by burning the incense that it was a source of courage, which I thought was very interesting. So if you need courage, burn some thyme.
Yeah, that's why I felt when you were describing the time at the beginning, I was like, wait, this is sounding a lot like sage for some reason. And like a lot of people burn sage as they're like cleaning the bad spirit away in that realm. I was like wondering if this can be the similar kind of like line of product where you can use to clean your house, clean your spirit, and also like you say, like you want to burn it for courage. That's an awesome thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I learned all time.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Yeah, very good. Cool. Well, you have any other questions about time? Anything else you have to say about time?
That's it so far. You've opened all the doors for me to learn more about this plant. Actually, I never thought, like, usually to me it's just like, oh, this is a beautiful like sidekick of any main entree. Now it's just like, wow, it has so many cool functions.
Yeah, and I think it's like, oh yeah, it's always lumped in with all these other herbs. But no, give thyme its credit. Thyme is cool. And so yeah, thyme.
It's a beautiful plant.
Indeed, thyme, that herb of courage, is always on your side. This song, Time Is On My Side, was of course made popular by the Rolling Stones, but this version we're hearing now is actually the very first version ever recorded. It was written by the songwriter Jerry Ragavoy, but this was recorded by the trombonist Kai Winding. But his background vocalists you're hearing now were made up of a very famous group of women, including Cissy Houston, that's Whitney Houston's mom, Dionne Warwick, and Dee Dee Warwick. I've never read The Prisoner by Marcel Proust, but I have recently become aware of a quotation from that book, which I'd like to share with you now, if that's okay. That quote says as follows: "A pair of wings, a different respiratory system, which enabled us to travel through space would in no way help us, for if we visited Mars or Venus while keeping the same senses, they would clothe everything we could see in the same aspect as the things of Earth. The only true voyage, the only bath in the fountain of youth, would be not to visit strange lands, but to possess other eyes, to see the universe through the eyes of another, of 100 others, to see the 100 universes that each of them sees, that each of them is, and this we do with great artists. With artists like these, we really do fly from star to star." That quote has been later much abridged to, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And in the book, as I understand it, he's talking about how artists and art can show us new worlds and give us new eyes and let us see through the eyes of the artists. But I believe that it's not just art that can do that, but it's, having conversations with people. And that's something that I hope this podcast can do for you. It definitely does it for me. And in this case, Wen Ting let me borrow her eyes, and now I have new eyes for the plant foxtail. This is a plant that I never really noticed before. It was invisible to me, but now after hearing Wen Ting talk about foxtail and why it's important to her, I'm now seeing it everywhere, and it's really kind of this amazing experience to see this plant just everywhere I look now, and I definitely have new eyes for this plant. So I hope that maybe you can have that experience with this podcast, and if you have had that experience, feel free to send me a message, rootboundpodcast@gmail.com. Before we go, there's just a couple other little notes about foxtail. One, if you're trying to Google it to see what it looks like, there's a couple other plants with that common name foxtail, so if you want to find this one, Google that genus that Wen Ting mentioned at the beginning of the show, which is Setaria. That's Setaria. Another little thing that I learned while Googling about foxtail is, I guess it can be a little bit dangerous for dogs. Sometimes the little seeds that come out of foxtail can get in a dog's eye or in their ear, and it can be, painful and cause some inflammation. So if you have a dog, maybe try to keep them away from foxtail. And one last little thing is I neglected to ask Wen Ting how you say foxtail in Chinese. So here's a little voice memo from Wen Ting to take us out.
There are two ways to say foxtail in Chinese. First one is 狗尾巴草, meaning dog-tail grass. The second one is 毛毛狗. It means furry dog.
My guest on today's episode of Rootbound was Wen Ting Gu. Wen Ting is a still life photographer in New York City. Rootbound is hosted by Steve Ellington, that's me. Music by Christian Kriegescota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside, try to look at the world with new eyes. And if you feel like it, send me a message. Tell me what you see.
Oh, it's water!